Joe Mackenzie here. Today we're going to talk about the color Viridian. Viridian is the only green that I have on my palette, and I'm going to talk about how I use it and why it is the only green that I have. So remember to keep your paints wet, and let's get started. Viridian. Now I live in a state that is called Vermont here in the United States, and it is a very green state. So it's very important for me to have a variety of greens to work with, but I only have one green on my palette, and it is Viridian. There it is, straight from the tube with very little water added to it. So you can see it's a dark value, relatively dark, but I would call it a dark value, about the value of ultramarine blue. Now I'm going to add some water to it and thin it out a little bit. Now I always talk about not using water to get to the color value that you want to get to. I mean, you do it sometimes, of course, but as a practice, it will make your paintings look weak. All right, so there's Viridian with the water gradations, and I'll put the value finder up so you can see the changes. All right, so that's a variety of what Viridian will do on its own. So why is Viridian the only green that I have on my palette? Well, one of the reasons is because I've tried other greens and I hate them. Although I do use Aurelian, which is sort of, which I've said is an essential color, and that I use it as a yellow, but it probably is a greenish yellow. There's alizarin crimson right next to the Viridian. I wanted to show the two values together. That you can see that the Viridian is dark, the alizarin crimson is not. I use alizarin crimson as a mid-tone, even though it is a dark red, and I've done another video just about alizarin. All right, now I'm going to put, this is a watered down ultramarine blue, because I use these three as a triad sometimes. And I wanted to just put them near each other. You can see that they kind of go. When you're dealing with a triad, you want to find three colors that will go together, and when they mix together, they'll be agreeable. So here's some watered down Viridian, and now I'm going to put in some ultramarine blue and also some alizarin crimson. I just want you to see that this could be used as a shadow shape. It could be, a shadow shape like a gray shape. Let's say a vase on a table was leaving a shadow. That could be your shadow shape using that triad. You can also use this triad as a dark triad, but this is a case of showing it as a watered down triad. And I'm plugging a little bit of alizarin in at the very end. And now I'll show. That's what I mean when I talk about mass for value, mix for color. That would be the mass, that shape, and I've used three colors to create a value, one value for that whole shape, which ended up being kind of a mid-toned shape, not a dark shape. All right, so now let's, oh, okay, now I know where I went. So now, still using watered down Viridian and alizarin crimson, I wanted to show what fantastic grays it will make. Now this is just one example. These two colors, of course, because they're complementary colors, opposites on the color wheel, they will come together and neutralize each other. Look at how warm that gray is that's between the two of them. I mean, I don't even think you can get something from a tube that's as sumptuous as that gray. And here it is, a gray of Viridian and alizarin when the colors are not diluted with water. Again, a pretty fantastic gray, which could be used anywhere you wanted to apply some real darks. So I use Viridian a lot for grays because I think that combined with red, it can make beautiful, warm grays. All right, I'm not sure what happens here. I just did this like a second ago, but my memory is so short. It's like, what did I do? Oh, right. We're going to get to that box in a minute. But now let's look at that triad of alizarin crimson, Viridian, and ultramarine blue and how it might be used. I use it sometimes when I want to paint white. I can use it for clouds. I can use it for a white cup, for example. As long as I keep those colors watered down and combine them together, they will create one overall light value, like I showed on that, I don't know, whatever that shape was that I first did. But here I am doing it within the context of, say, a cup. And it creates a gray shape, but it's a much more, I don't want to say alive kind of gray shape, then a gray shape would be if you took some gray out of a tube or used one color. And there's the, so, and here's an example of where if you use the triad in a light way on the cup, and then again use the triad in a dark way underneath the cup to indicate the shadow, they just go together really well, like chords on a piano. They just, because their mix is made of the same colors, they just, I don't know how to say it, they go. I think it's a lot like flavors in food. You know, flavors either go together or they don't. Chocolate and raspberry really go together. Chocolate and peanut butter go together. These colors go together. All right, now here's Viridian with some ultramarine blue added to it, because I'm showing what would happen if I took ultramarine blue, Viridian, and added darker blues to it. I could go into Prussian, I could even go into indigo, and that scale would keep going out darker, darker, darker. Or I can go the other way with Viridian and add yellow to it. I think this is a cadmium yellow, and there's a nice full spectrum of greens. Not hard to get there at all. So again, you know, those dabs represent different tubes that you don't have to buy because Viridian, ultramarine blue, and a cadmium yellow will get you all those colors and more. Now what I'm doing is showing what would happen if I was to put some flowers in that cup. Now because I used Viridian in the shadow shape of the cup and I used Viridian in the dark shadow underneath the cup, I can use Viridian in that light mix, and I'm using Viridian on its own there to show some darks. But because I've used Viridian in these mixes, again, everything's going to go. There's like a continuing thread through all of this, and the continuing thread is Viridian is being used. And I'm going to do the same thing when I add some flowers to this. Now again, I used alizarin in the triad of the light side of the cup and in the dark shadow, so I'm using alizarin again. And again, it goes because it's showing up, it's repeating in a sense a pattern of, oh, you were down there in the cup and you were in the shadow? Oh, of course you would be in the flowers too. And then when I want to make something darker, that is Viridian going in. And when it combines without me rubbing, but just comes near those flower shapes, it turns into a purple. I wish I could go in, I wish my camera was better and you could see the moments that are happening there, because those colors are fusing in together without me doing any kind of rubbing. They're just kind of joining each other. And the whole thing becomes kind of a very cohesive moment. Now I'm going back in and just doing the same thing that I did on that cup in the first place, but I'm going to do it again because, as you know, watercolor often dries lighter than when you put it down. So sometimes you have to make adjustments, especially after you've made other decisions. So that this is just an adjustment. But I hope you've noticed that there's no rubbing going on, and I'm using as few strokes as possible. I want to be a delivery of paint, but I don't want to be, I don't really want to tell the paint where to go. All right, now back to the box. Okay, so you have a dark side of the box. So that's Viridian with some ultramarine blue in it, and now here's some Viridian. I'm trying to get some Viridian just all on its own. So with very little water added to it, so that could be the dark side of a box or a shape. Or let's say that was a leaf. That could be the dark side of a leaf or the underside of a leaf. Now I'm going to dry it. Of course, it's going to dry a little bit lighter, but it's going to hold, it's pretty much going to hold its color because there's very little water added to the paint in that mix. And now I want to find a side for a lighter side of the box to the right. But I checked it out, and through the value finder, that didn't work. So I'm crossing it out. Nope, that's too close in value to the dark shape. So what I'm doing here is taking Viridian and adding more yellow to it. Okay, that'll work. That's lighter. So I'll put that in. I can also tell it's toned down a little bit. I can tell because there was some alizarin on my brush. It's just slightly toned down. But it fits the value of being a lighter value than the front of the box. Now I have to find a value for the top of the box. The point here is I'm not using water to get there. A three-sided box without using water to get there. And I used Viridian for the top of the box. So there's a box that's loaded with color, but I didn't use water to get there. Likewise, there's a spectrum of greens that you can see going along the bottom left, and I didn't use water to get there. You can see where I use triads with water added to make the paint thinner, but when I added the paints together, what I did was I let them meet and mingle, so I don't end up with a gray mass. I would have ended up with a gray mass if I had done any kind of rubbing. As soon as you start rubbing or licking the paper with your brush, those colors won't be individual anymore. They'll join together, they'll fuse together. And you have to decide when you want triads to be seen, um, on their individual, with their individual colors in them, and when you want them not to be seen. You don't use anything all the time. There's the Viridian I use. It's a Daniel Smith, which is nice and creamy. Winsor Newton makes a Viridian, but that Viridian is, I was saying that the Daniel Smith Viridian is very creamy, and the Winsor Newton Viridian is a really nice color, but it tends to be a little bit gritty. Did I say that right? The Daniel Smith is smooth. The Winsor Newton can be a little bit gritty, but I use both. And now what I just wanted to show was Viridian if you add some Naples yellow to it. This is just Viridian and Naples yellow. Oh no, it's Viridian Naples yellow is the first mark. The second is Viridian with yellow, added to it cadmium yellow, and the third one, I don't know what it's going to be. But the point of making these three was sometimes I want to paint in a really high key. Okay, there's a high key gray made from Viridian and Naples yellow. So sometimes if I want to paint in a high key, those would be the three values that I would want to use, and only those three values to stay in a high key. Not all paintings need to be the full spectrum, although I tend to try to make all of my paintings a full spectrum when I can. I just find high key painting incredibly difficult to do, but boy, do I admire it when I see people do it. And I'd go through periods when I just decide, oh, I'm going to tackle it, and I'll come back to it over and over, but I'm just not there yet, being able to be consistently in a high key. It's all a process. So that is why I used Viridian as my only green, and I'm not saying that anybody else should do what I do. This is just some information that I've found over the years. So remember to keep the whites of your paper white, your paints wet, mass for value, mix for color. Please join my YouTube channel, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.